So the title of this shir is the comparison between the Mitzvah of Tzisis and the Mitzvah of living in Eretz Yisrael. So we know that the Mitzvah of Tzisis is mentioned at the end of the Parsha, which deals with the sin of the spies who came back with a negative report on entering Eretz Yisrael. And so Rashi already points out that the words which are used in the Parsha of the spies is Vayishuv mitur haaretz, mitur, to tour the land, to explore the land. So Rashi says, by Tzitzit it says, V'lo taturu, it should not go astray. Acharei levavchem v'acharei einechem. That means you shouldn't tour in your mind, imagination, to follow sinful thoughts. And it's similar to the sinful thoughts that went on in the minds of the spies. In fact, Rashi changes the expression of the Midrash, which says that the eyes and the inner imagination of the heart, they bring the stimuli for people to sin. For sin in matters of sexual immorality, as well as in coveting, and it's a sort of coveting that belongs to somebody else, even to come to steal. And in the Midrash it says, He mesaserim laguf, there are agents for the body. Rashi changes the language, they are meraglim laguf, they are spies for the body. They're spies for those things that affect the body of the human being to be sinful. So, in other words, sin starts from the stimuli that comes from the materialistic eyes that lead also to sinful thoughts. And sinful thoughts then produce the sinner, the evil actions. Why did Rashi specially refer mitur haaretz? He could have chosen the original word in the Parsha, v'yaturu et Eretz Canaan. So the answer is, Moshe Rabbeinu, when he said v'yaturu, let me go and explore the land of Canaan, he meant, yes, use your imagination and the feelings of your heart, what it would be like to enjoy and live the fantastic life in Eretz Yisrael with the constant help of Hashem. But apart from the two, the other 10, they thought, well, it's too difficult for us. We can't. It's a strong nation. We didn't have enough trust in Hashem, which, according to the way Rashi describes it, in other words, to go more deeply and briefly, they did not appreciate enough the significance of Techelet. Because the Ptil Techelet, the sages say, in order to oppose the evil of the stimuli from the eyes, so Hashem says, I give you something else. I want you to look at the Techelet. The Techelet, I'll give you an action which is materialistic action, to go and make tzitzis, and to make on the tzitzit Techelet, which is the blue, and the blue should always remind you of the heavenly dimension. It should remind you there's a power behind the heavenly dimension, and that power should rule your eyes. And once you have that ruling your eyes, Uritem, it says, then you remember the mitzvah of Hashem. And then what will it do? The eye, which looks at the concrete symbol of the heavens, will influence your imagination, that you use your imagination to think, well, there's a constant creator who's producing everything in the world. And that constant creator is also the one who's going to lead us into the land of Israel, and he will look after us. That's the concept of the blue and the white. So that it will remind you of that heaven. And as a result, you will actually perform the mitzvot. and your life will be not of a sinner but of a saint, because through this you remember all the mitzvot. You remember, I've got want to dedicate my whole life, individual and national, to Hashem, which is really the purpose of Am Yisrael, to be Mamlechet Kohanim v'Kol Kadosh. And we know that the color of the garments of the Kohanim is primarily Tchelet, to remind you of the heavenly dimension. This is all inherent in Rashi. So we see that the mitzvah of Tzitzit is closely connected with the mitzvah of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael, which the sages also say is Shekula Kotala Mitzvot. The mitzvah of Tzitzit won't go into all the different ways in which it symbolizes and gives us a reminder of all the mitzvot, but that is what's written in the Chumash. And in other words, we have to use the mitzvot ma'asiyot to stimulate the eye, the materialistic eye. The materialistic eye should be subject to the mitzvot to fulfill them. By fulfilling them, we can influence our imagination to work in the right direction. And what will happen? We'll reach the level, that same heart that has the Yetzer Hara inside it. The Yetzer Hara will be subject to the Yetzer Hara Tov, and you learn the love of Hashem. Once you learn the love of Hashem, you of course also love Hashem in Eretz Yisrael, where you can experience that love to the full. If you'll only follow what Hashem has told us. That's one aspect of the similarity. So, we can understand something deeper as well as a result, because we should really ask the following question. We see in the sin of the Meraglim that when they heard the punishment was coming, in other words, that they would all die in the course of the next decades in the desert, so they said, Chatanu L'Hashem. They said, if you read the report of it, Dvarim, what happened? You came back with a report, yes, the land which Hashem has given us is very good. V'lo avitem la'alot. Moshe, you did not want to go up, because going to Eretz means to go up morally. You were not ready to face the challenge to go up morally and strengthen your trust in Hashem and reach a high level of Kedusha. Vatamri, you rebelled the mouth of Hashem. And then you slandered in your tents and you said, because Hashem hates us, He's taken us from the land of Egypt to give us over in the hands of the Amorites to destroy us. Because the spies have said, this is a very great nation, the Canaanites and their allies, and their cities are too fortified, and we also saw there the descendants of the giants. So, and I said to you, don't be afraid. Hashem goes in front of you. He will do all the battles for you, just like He's done all the time. All the experience for the time of Egypt. He fought for you against the Egyptians, which is the most mighty empire and the strongest army in the area. And then, didn't you see in the desert, that Hashem lifted you up like a man looks after his son when he's going through a difficult journey? The whole path which you have gone till you came to this place, who was carrying you all the time? Hashem. So, Badavaze, you did not have enough trust in Hashem, who walks in front of you and Latur Lachem. He'll do the exploration for you, and rely upon Him. He'll find the right place where you can camp, looked after you constantly. But Hashem heard your words, that you didn't want to accept it, that you didn't want to reach that level of trust. And therefore He said, it says, I'm not giving this generation the land, the holy land, because that's the real place to fulfill all the mitzvot. And they're not on the level. And then the people said, well, if that's going to be the decree, and we're all going to be dying in this desert, and only our children will take over, so you all answered and said to me, Chatanu L'Hashem, we are now confessing our sin. We'll go and battle like Hashem has commanded us. And therefore you got ready for the battle, and you decided you're going up the mountain. Hashem said to me, tell them not to go, because I am not in your midst. You're going, why? All right, you're saying you're regretting. You're wrong, but why are you really going? Because you don't want to die in the desert. That's not enough, I'm sorry. We need a higher spiritual vision. So Hashem said, don't go. Because if you do go, I'm not going to be in your midst. And if you go, you'll be smitten in front of your enemies. And I told you this. But you rebelled against the decision of Hashem, and you went on the mountain, and then the Amalekites joined the Amorites, and they destroyed you just like the bees who sting and die. And they'll also be willing to kill you, even if it means they die themselves. And they smote you till you were utterly destroyed. And Hashem wouldn't listen to you. So, the question is, if it's such a great mitzvah to go and live in Eretz Yisrael, and here there's a whole body who changed their minds, they recognized. Often we're given in the Torah terrible threats of what might happen. But we know, if we do teshuvah, even if the teshuvah mitoch yisurim or mitoch yira, Hashem listens. Even if the teshuvah is because we're afraid of something. But Hashem, He is merciful. He says, okay, so why wasn't Hashem ready to help them? So maybe we can answer it with another question. The mitzvah of Tzisis, which is mentioned at the end, and here I'm following the hints given by Rashi, is such a great mitzvah. It's equivalent to all the mitzvahs of the Torah. And from this mitzvah we learn out a great principle, that positive mitzvahs are greater than negative prohibitions. And if there's a clash between the two, aseh duchelu aseh. So this mitzvah teaches us something about all the mitzvahs of the Torah. So why is it that it teaches us, following the Ramban, love is greater than fear, and not to do transgressions is because we're afraid to go against the will of our Father in heaven, but only through fulfilling positive requests of Hashem do we express our love? The question is raised, why is it that aseh doichelois aseh is learned from the mitzvah of Tzisis, which is the weakest of the mitzvot? Why is it the weakest? Because nearly all the mitzvahs of the Torah are an obligation. There's an obligation. We're not even talking about Milah and Pesach, where there's even punishments, but even ordinary mitzvot are an obligation, like tefillin and mezuzah, and nearly all the mitzvahs of the Torah, that we have to eat matzah on Pesach and take Arba Minim on Sukkot. These are straightforward obligations. Tzitzis, according to the law of the Torah, it's only an obligation if you are wearing a four-cornered garment. And what happens if you don't wear a four-cornered garment? You've got no mitzvah of tzitzis according to Torah. Okay, it's indicated in the Chumash that this is never shekula k'neged mitzvahs. The question is why? Why couldn't you make the mitzvah of tzitzis, which is the weakest level of a mitzvah, because you can easily avoid it according to the Torah? Why is it equivalent to all the mitzvahs of the Torah? So the answer must be that the fact that you can excuse yourself from not doing the mitzvah, and you nevertheless do it, indicates that you've reached the level of the true love of Hashem. Because love is not shown when a person fulfills an obligation. That shows awe and respect. But love is only shown if a person does it of his own. For example, in matters of a person is told you've got to give a tithe. Okay, so he gives a tithe. Or a poor man comes up and says, give me money. You're obligated to give him. So you give him. But that's not yet doing things out of love. Doing things out of love is when there's no obligation. You don't have to give more than a tenth of your income. Not obligated. But if you give more and you can afford it, you have a mitzvah. It shows you're doing kindness out of love. Or if you go and do a kind act to someone when you didn't ask for it, but you see that he needs it, so It's not an obligation, but you do it. It shows you love. So love is greater than fear. And that's shown through Mitzvah of Tzisis. The essence of fulfilling mitzvahs out of love is shown by the Tzisis. And we see even that, if it opposes, let's say, such a prohibition as wearing mixed garments of wool and linen, we say that this is Kedusha. What's Kedusha mean? Holiness. When can you call a person holy? Not when he fulfills obligations. When he goes beyond that, and he loves Hashem, and he loves to do kindness to others. Those are actions of holiness. True hope. That's why I say, you want to reach the level of holiness, you have to do that. So the mitzvah of tzitzis indicates a level of holiness. Now when we try to understand this, we see, although it's a mitzvah which is optional, but it's so important because we've got to strive to reach the level which is heavenly. The level which is heavenly is you have to want to do it. You want to do it out of love. We'll have to transform your double heart to allow the materialistic energies and drives that you possess to be used as means to reach a higher level of spirituality, of love. That's indicated by the mitzvah of tzitzis, and that's shekula k'net kol ha-mitzvah shteda, because it's greater than all of them. Although it's not so chamur. We say a love is more chamur than naseh, but naseh, which is done out of the spirit of love, is gadol, is very much greater than all the other mitzvot. So we can say the same applies to Eretz Yisrael, is referred to in many pesukim to be equivalent to all the mitzvahs of the Torah. In fact, if one analyzes the Tanakh more deeply, the Chumash and the Prophets, then one recognizes that Eretz Yisrael is really the place for all the mitzvot. As is described at length by the Ramban, that the only place where you can fulfill all the mitzvot completely is Eretz Yisrael. Even the mitzvot that you can fulfill anywhere in the world, if they're fulfilled at Eretz Yisrael, they've got a double quality. That's one of the reasons where we have Yom Tov Sheni, which is dealing with perhaps in the Gemara, some of you. Yom Tov Sheni Shel Golos. If you're in the Golos, the power of Kedusha, of Eretz Yisrael, if you want to have something equivalent abroad, outside Eretz, you've got to have it for 2 days. In 1 day you can't get it. While here in Eretz Yisrael, it's more concentrated. This is the land of mitzvahs. That's its purpose. So if it's so important, so the question arises, when this group called the Ma'apilim, who said, we'll go up, why wasn't the Ark of the Covenant with them? Why wasn't Hashem, he said, I'm not in your midst, and therefore you'll die if you're going to try to conquer Eretz Yisrael without me, you're going to, unfortunately, might even come, because it's reference also to future ages, you might even come to the level that you'll be in Golos, and you'll die in the Golos without coming to Eretz Yisrael in future generations. And this is hinted at, this whole concept, it's hinted at clearly in Tehillim. Tehillim, Kufvav, 106, where there's a description of the history of Eretz Yisrael and its implications for the future. And describes here the exodus from Egypt, describes the Chet HaEgel, the sin of the golden calf, and then it describes that Hashem took you through the desert, and then it says, they forgot God to redeem them. There were so many marvels in Egypt, which continued also at the Yam Suf. But then Hashem, when you forgot all about it, Hashem wanted to destroy the people. Were it not for Moshe Rabbeinu, who stood and stopped the breach, and he tried to take away the anger from producing destruction of the nation of Israel. Vayima'asu be'eretz chemda, but they despised the beloved land. Lo himinu lidvarov, they did not trust the word of Hashem. Vayiroknu v'olehem, and they went and slandered the land in their tents. Lo shamu b'kol Hashem, they did not listen to the voice of Hashem. Vayisai yado lahem, so Hashem lifted up his hand against them, lapil otam b'midbar, to cause them all to die in the desert, ulapil zarom bagoyim, and to cause their seed to become scattered amongst the nations, ulezarotam ba'aratzot, and to spread them out in all the different lands of this globe. So we see here, not only was there gezerah made on Am Yisrael of that generation to die, but also on the descendants. The same thing might happen in the future. And even the Mapilim, who wanted to go and save the situation, no, they're threatened. They're threatened with suicide bombers. Ad kedei kach. So therefore, we can't expect to have the land. And the question is why? If it's such a great mitzvah, it's so important, and we see the reason why Hashem took out Am Yisrael from Mitzrayim was to bring them into Eretz. Why couldn't that generation go and be forgiven if they were ready to fight? They changed their minds. So the answer is, the mitzvah of living in Eretz Yisrael is similar to the mitzvah of Tzisis. It's equivalent to all but it's a land always called of Kedusha. It's the place where we're going to become a Goy Kadosh. And Kedusha, you can't reach it if you're only fulfilling the mitzvot because you feel you've got to fulfill the commandment of Hashem. It's not enough. In other words, you've got to do it because you want to do it. And maybe that's the reason why even when we're in Eretz Yisrael today, but there are not enough Jews coming here who really want it because of the Kedusha of Eretz Yisrael. Because if you just want it because you don't want to die from the different anti-Semitic attacks which take place period after period, the Chutz La'aretz, not good enough. Hashem wants us to come here with the color of blue and white. With the color, blue is important. It may be not available today, according to some authorities entirely, but we've got to strive for it. Especially as our flag. That might be the lesson. Now from this, let us try and analyze this question from the point of view of halacha. It's clear that in practice, a person who comes to Eretz Yisrael today and he wants to escape all the troubles, like they choose in countries of trouble, Middle Eastern countries, where it's dangerous for Jews to be. So of course the Jews want to come here, and they're trying to come here by every possible means. And the truth is, if they come here, the truth is they've certainly fulfilled the mitzvah of living the land of Israel according to all authorities, if they nevertheless come here. That's for sure. Now the question is, let's look at the sources for this whole question. So the major source we have of the early is in the Gemara. Gemara in Ksuvas, which describes an important halacha in the Mishnah. Like it says, "Hakol malin le'eretz Yisrael, ve'en hakol motzi'in." Everybody can be induced to come to Eretz Yisrael, but not everybody is permitted to leave Eretz Yisrael. So Rashi says, this is the mitzvah. It's called b'nei beito adam kofeh lalot le'ashev be'eretz Yisrael. Every person can ask his family to come to live in Eretz Yisrael, but you can't also force. You can't force people to leave Eretz Yisrael. And the same applies relationship with husband and wife. In other words, a wife who wants to come to Eretz Yisrael and the husband refuses, so she can request a divorce and he has to pay the ketuvah. And vice versa. What if the husband wants to come to Eretz Yisrael and the wife does not want to come, then he can come to Eretz Yisrael and does not have to give a ketuvah. That shows us that, why is it? Because there's an obligation for every Jew to come to Eretz Yisrael. So, therefore, that comes even into this question of if there's difference of opinion, husband and wife. So, on this passage, then there's a whole few pages in the Gemara to discuss the importance of living in Eretz Yisrael. Up to the extent, I'll just quote one extreme Braita, all from the Tanaim, a person should always live in L'olam Yadu Adam Be'eretz Yisrael. A person should always live in Eretz Yisrael, even in a city where most of the people are idolaters. He should not live in Chutz La'aretz, even in a city where most of them are Jews. Because everyone lives in Eretz Yisrael is similar to a person who has a God. And anyone who lives in Chutz La'aretz is similar to a person who does not have a God. As it says, Latet lachem et Eretz Canaan, liot lachem l'olkim. As it says, I want to give the land of Canaan. In land of Canaan, I'll be a God. Now, to explain this more deeply, as expounded by the Ramban, it means to really feel the nearness of Hashem, which Hashem wants to do with Am Yisrael. They should be the Segula Mikol Amim. As we discussed in other Shiurim, that Hashem wants to have direct connections. Rak etchem yatati. You are my people. From the time of the forefathers till the future Mashiach, you are to be the people. You've got the potential through the constant level of history and my personal connection with you and creating so many miracles. For you, they have to reach their fulfillment at Eretz Yisrael. That's where it's complete. But if you're not there, it's incomplete. This is what gives support to the whole concept of Eretz Yisrael as expounded primarily by the Ramban. So, we're not surprised that the Ramban, we'll have it in Parshas Maseh in a few weeks, on the Pasuk in chapter 33, chapter 33, Pasuk 53, where it says, "Vorashtam et haaretz v'shaftem ba," you should clear out the land and take it in possession and live in it. From here, the Ramban says, we see there's a mitzvah, an obligation for Jews to live in Eretz Yisrael, and he says it applies at all times. He says not the only verse, there are many other verses. So in order to demonstrate the different views of this, I will first read you what the Rambam says. The Rambam is, after all, the posek, mainly upon whom both the Rif, and the Rambam follows the Rif frequently, and later on the Rosh and the Shulchan Aruch base their halachic decisions. So the Rambam says like this. He says, it's forbidden for a person to leave Eretz Yisrael to go to another country, le'olam, any time, except to learn Torah or to marry, or to save people from non-Jewish hostilities and come back to Eretz Yisrael. And also allowed to go abroad for business, but should come back. But he said to go and live in Chutz La'aretz, it's forbidden, unless there was not enough to eat. There was a famine in Eretz Yisrael.
Which is not the case today.
Yeah. Then he says furthermore, he also brings literally the same statement from the Gemara, from the Braita, person should always live in Eretz Yisrael, even in a city where most of them are idolaters. And the proof the Gemara brings is from David HaMelech, when he was forced to leave Eretz Yisrael because he was pursued by Shaul and he was afraid for his life. So he went abroad. He said, they've stopped me from being Benachalat Hashem, in the inheritance of Hashem, which is the land, to tell me go and serve idols. So this is the decision also of the Rambam. And it would appear the Rambam regards this as the halacha. So the question arises, the Rambam mentions 613 mitzvot. And he mentions many mitzvot, about 100 of them, that are dependent upon living in the land of Israel. He does not mention one of the 613 to be living in Eretz Yisrael. Question is, why not? And therefore the Ramban, in the book of mitzvot, where the Ramban criticizes the Rambam for omitting certain mitzvot, so he says that he doesn't understand. Why doesn't he mention this mitzvah? He says this is a mitzvah already given to Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, and then afterwards to the people, we should not allow Eretz Yisrael to be in the hand of the nations. And he describes at length that part of this mitzvah is, one part, is a national mitzvah. It goes to the whole nation. A national mitzvah that the nation should organize itself to possess the land. So it said there are different levels. There was the level of Yeshua, who was told he had to do it, even to fight and risk lives. And then we had later milchamot, which had to be the milchema of the 7 nations, was Yeshua and his successors. Then afterwards, it was more a question of wars of self-defense, which if nations come, we are in the land of Israel, nations come to attack us, we have the duty to protect ourselves in every way. He said there's one aspect of but to do a milchama, to take over the land, to conquer it, that we can only do when there's a Sanhedrin, and when there's a Kohanim, or when there's Urim V'Tumim. There are a lot of conditions. We don't have the oracle on the breastplate of the Kohen Gadol. We don't have a Sanhedrin. Therefore, we have no duty today, according to the Ramban, to conquer the land, because we have to have a different madrega, which we don't have today. But he says the prohibition is still there. We include it in the mitzvah for the nation. The nation is not allowed to go and say, we'll go and live in a different land. We'll even make all the negotiations that the future Jewish state of the Jewish people is going to be in Madagascar and Uganda or any other place. It has to be in Eretz Yisrael. And then he says there's another part of the mitzvah, which he says, uses the phrase, there's a chovah al kol yachid, a mitzvah, the deed of Eretz Yisrael, on which the sages make the statement, anyone who leaves Eretz Yisrael, even if he's in a place, Chutz La'aretz, where most of them are Jews, he has a mitzvah to stay in Eretz Yisrael, even in a place where most of them are idolaters. And there are many other statements made that mitzvah Shishuv Eretz Yisrael, Shkul L'Kner Kol HaMitzvot. So he says there's a duty on each individual to go and live in Eretz Yisrael. Choval Kol Yachid, to live in Eretz Yisrael. And that's the Pshat, Yeshiva Eretz Yisrael, Shkul L'Kner Kol HaMitzvot. So the nation is one thing, that perhaps doesn't apply today, called the Ramban, but the individual mitzvah, like it also appears from the Rambam, applies to everybody. So the question is, why doesn't the Rambam reckon this as one of the 613? So, this is the one, De Leon, who wrote called the Megillat Esther, which means he tried to reveal the hidden meanings of the Rambam, that he left out certain mitzvot. So he says, because he claims that the mitzvah only applied in the time of Moshe and Yeshua and David, as long as they hadn't gone to exile. But afterwards, there's no mitzvah left until the Mashiach will come. On the contrary, we've been warned that we should not rebel against the nations to conquer the land by force, and is proved from oaths which are expressed in the Song of Songs, on the basis of which the sages said, we learn out from here that the people of Israel should not try to reconquer the land. So therefore we see that doesn't apply. Therefore he says, even when it says that you've got to live in the land of Israel, even in the places where there are idolaters, that's the only way you have closeness to God, and outside Eretz Yisrael you are far removed from it, that also only applies before the Galut. That's the time of the Galut. He said, which he connects the two. He says also only limited. Since it's only limited, the Rambam doesn't count it. Now this is indeed a very difficult answer, because the Rambam, for example, he says you can only build the Beit HaMikdash in the time of the Mashiach. It's one of the 613 mitzvot. So if the mitzvah will reapply in the time of the Mashiach, so the Rambam should have mentioned it. And whichever, the Rambam does say, in time of the Mashiach, will take over Eretz Yisrael completely. So it has no basis really. Because there are many mitzvot, the Rambam reckons 613, which don't have application in the Galut. So it's a difficult answer. That's this is very difficult. So there are others who want to say that the Gemara brought in Kesuvos, the Mishnah, which says a husband can force a wife and a wife a husband to come to Eretz Yisrael or lose their rights. So on that there's a Tzisis, a cryptic Tzisis, who says either Mishnah and then the Gemara say it's an obligation to live in Eretz Yisrael. So we know Tzisis lived in the Middle Ages. So he says it doesn't apply today. Because it's too dangerous. Well, that we have a proof. Because also, David HaMelech couldn't remain in Eretz Yisrael because Shaul threatened to kill him. It was too dangerous. So he said, why did they take me away? I've got no choice. So we see from here that Pikuach Nefesh is doch all the mitzvot, as we know, including the mitzvah issue of Eretz Yisrael. If it's too dangerous, then it's not so. And we find, let's say, in the same time, Middle Ages, there were many Jews who came to Eretz Yisrael and they were willing to face the danger. We've got to understand, many of the Jews, they thought, it's dangerous where I am. And wherever they were in the Middle Ages, with all the pogroms and all the crusades and so on, wherever the Jews were in Muslim lands, also similarly, there were ups and downs all the time. They were being pursued from one place to the other. So, when some of them, they thought, right, we'll go to Eretz Yisrael. And we know both the Kuzari and the Ramban, when they came to Eretz Yisrael, they faced great death. Because the Huda Levi loved Eretz Yisrael so much, so he came, but he was murdered when he came here. But he felt also he could just as well have been murdered where he came from, and because the ups and downs all the time. And certainly the Ramban had to leave Spain in any case, because he was victorious in disputations. So the king said, if you'll stay here, you'll be murdered, so better go. So this is the situation. Tzechanat Rachim applies today as well. So people have to weigh up. Where's it more dangerous? So they have a right not to come. And then he brings Vayomer Rabbeinu Chaim. Then he brings Rabbeinu Chaim, who says, Achshav, Eino mitzvah lador be'eretz Yisrael. There's no mitzvah, even if it's not dangerous. There are many mitzvah dependent on the land, and many punishments if you don't do them, and we're not strong enough to fulfill all those mitzvot.
Who says that?
Rabbi Chaim HaKohen.
Who is that?
One of the Baalei Tosfos. It's one of the Baalei Tosfos. But listen to this. I bring you now the summing up of these different views. What's the Ramban's view? What's the Rambam's view? And by the way, I'll tell you that Ramban, who says it's a mitzvah until today, he has support that Haredim, also one of the Rishonim, says the same. It's a mitzvah, it's an obligation for everybody who can go, unless there's danger to life, or the other, unless he has to go to get married, or he can't learn Torah in Eretz Yisrael. The different ways whereby you can, al-pi Torah, stay outside Eretz Yisrael. And they have the Rambam is a bit of a cryptic thing. Why doesn't it count as one of the mitzvot? Then we have Rabbi Chaim Kohen, it doesn't apply. And the Megillat Esther, it's very difficult. So this is the summing up of the Shloah HaKodesh, where he sums up the different opinions. So we have a special connection with him. So, but his work is, in fact, many people only know him by the name Shalom. And I'll tell you by the side, when we came into Eretz Yisrael, I went to his kever in Tiberia, where he's buried, the same place as the burial of the Rambam. And all it said on the kever was, Po Nitman Baal Shloh HaKodesh. That's all, Baal Shloh. It said, Here there's buried the Shalah. The Shalah is Shnei Luchot Abris, is the name of his Sefer. It's a very deep Sefer where he discusses all the mitzvahs of the Torah, both from the point of halacha and also the point of hashkafa and point of view of Kabbalah. All these aspects are intertwined. Anyway, we were zoiche, together with my brother, to go and make a text of it, describing a bit what he achieved in his lifetime. Anyway, he says the holiness of the place of Eretz Yisrael, which is originally Gan Eden, and then it said that the Eretz Yisrael, I'm sure, was driven out from Gan Eden, and the level of Adam HaRishon in Gan Eden was replaced by the Ummah Yisraelit, who are also called Adam in the Torah. Why they're called Adam? Because we have to follow the pattern of Adam, and we've been given Eretz Yisrael, the Kedusha of which is Me'en Kedusha Gan Eden. That's how Yechezkel describes it. Ha'eretz halazu haneshama haita kagan Eden. It's like the Gan Eden. And even now when it's destroyed, the place still has its holiness. And this is Eretz Asher Hashem Doresh Ota. And all Yisrael who are there, they must try to know, all Am Yisrael who are not able to be there, they have to send their prayers via this land to Yerushalayim, and from Yerushalayim to the Kodesh Kodashim, because it's the gate to heaven. And there are many other good qualities in Eretz Yisrael. So he brings Hakol Malin, and he says, this Mishnah, which is Halacha, and is decided by the Rif and the Rambam, and the Rosh, and the Torah, and the Shulchan Aruch, until today. That is quoted, this is Halacha, and it proves the situation, that it's an obligation. It wouldn't be an obligation. What right has a husband to come to Eretz Yisrael and give his wife a divorce without a ketuvah, and vice versa? What right does a woman have if she wants to leave her husband just because she wants to be in Eretz Yisrael, and the husband's obligated to give her the ketuvah? So therefore we see it's an obligation. So therefore what Tosfos says in the name of Reb Chaim, he says there's no mitzvah they live in Eretz Yisrael because there are many mitzvahs with many punishments who don't fulfill them, and we can't do them. He says, what do you mean? This is an individual Baal Tosfos, and it doesn't make any sense. His reason makes no sense.
I agree.
What? Tzadikim Yelchum Bashim, that applies to all the mitzvahs. You can say that all the mitzvahs are not obligated because it's too difficult. Like you go, most of the people I dealt with in the community try and bring them to mitzvahs. They say it's too difficult. We can't keep Yom Tov. We can't keep. When I came to the shul, they were all carrying things to the shul. There was no air. What do you mean you can't? What, you expect us to come in without our handbags, without our wallets? We can't do such things. You see? And we'll even come with the talis. I don't want to leave my talis in the shul. So then they said, "But I've got to keep Yom Tov. It's too difficult. I've got to keep Shabbos. My business on Shabbos." So everybody can say that. What type of reasoning is this? This Reb Chaim. He says it's not right.
I agree.
Someone, it's quite true, who lives in Eretz Yisrael and doesn't fulfill the mitzvahs, then certainly is a posher, it's much worse. But somebody who tries to keep the mitzvah, so keeps was Ashraf. And then who says we can't fulfill it? Let's learn it and fulfill it. Let's teach it, people will fulfill it. Therefore, we take no notice of his words. But I'll go further. This is Rabbi Chaim Cohen. She said, it's well known this. The Agos Mordechai, he brings this Rabbi Chaim in the tshuva, and it's Rabbi Chaim, it's a mistake. They say the text in the Tzisis is a mistake. Rabbi Chaim Akom, one of the Balei Tosfos, said today it doesn't apply, this obligation, because it's too dangerous to come to Eretz Yisrael. And it was some Talmud, it was from Amoretz, who put in, we can't fulfill the mitzvahs. But it's not really a quotation from Baal Tosfos. It's a mistake. And they bring a proof. V'chol divrei Chaim Cohen, hu hamishum sakanat derachim. And the Marit says explicitly, who lived in the time of the Shlomo, he says, with many kashas, and he said he found in Agos Mordechai, which is very early, time of Mordechai, very close to the Bali Tzisis. Harachuvas Rabbi Chaim lo ba ele mitam sakanat derachim, u'ma shekatvu hatotzvot ein mitzvah l'do b'Yisrael, hagaat talmid hi v'lav t'samchu. Some Talmud wrote it, put it on the notes, and you can't rely on it. The Pesach Tshuva agrees with this, and many other poskim say the same. It cannot be the words of one of the Bali Tzisis. So therefore, it's quite true that if it's a sakona, a person has to know if he can take the risk. And the Beis Yosef brings this as well, that the din of koifin applies if it's not too dangerous. And this is repeated by many of the poskim. The Trumas tradition says there is an obligation today to go to Eretz Yisrael. Because if it's asked the question, is it a mitzvah there or not? He says, and the Talmud Chacham, he says, yes, one has to go, but of course, if you've got to, you should also make sure you continue learning there. But that's also important. But he says it's certainly a mitzvah today for everybody who can do it, and if he's not going to face starvation, even though you've got to be more mitzumtzam, not everybody can do that. And also the Godel Rishat HaIshmaelim Hashasham is afraid of the Bedouins and the Arabs might rob him and kill him. But he says we should still fulfill it as much as possible. And then he brings this Mama Chazal, he adds an important note. He says, Mama Chazal we had already, if you live in Eretz Yisrael, even in a place where there are idolaters, then you still have an obligation. It's greater to live in Chutz La'aretz. And he says this Braisa speaks Afila B'chor Bana. You shouldn't think the Braisa only speaks about time with Beis HaMikdash, like the Megillat Esther wants to say. No, it applies even when Eretz is in a Churban. It's still a big mitzvah to live in Eretz Yisrael if you can afford it, and if you can carry on fulfilling the mitzvah there. If there's religious persecution there, or you've got to weigh it up. Where is it less persecution, where you can make ends meet. But the mitzvah as such is a mitzvah in Torah. So therefore, we come here to this question. We have a summing up of all the different views, and I'll add to it a bit more, that the Rambam, how do we understand the Rambam, who does not mention one of the mitzvah? So many say, the Rambam regards it as a mitzvah shebechlalot. He does not count teshuvah as a mitzvah. Some also say, because teshuvah really covers all the mitzvahs of the Torah in certain ways. The Rambam does count the method of teshuvah through confession. That's the mitzvah. But the general principle of doing teshuvah, the Rambam has a whole section on it. But that, although it's mentioned so frequently in the Torah, that's the reason why he does not call it one of this particular mitzvot. Because, in fact, at the end of Hilchot Teshuvah, he says, the whole essence of Teshuvah is the essence of the Torah. To go and use your freedom of choice to improve things, to improve your life, to improve your qualities and your talent. So he doesn't reckon it. Lav shebechlolos. There's aseh shebechlolos. And the same applies to this mitzvah. That's why he doesn't count it. And then there's other Rishonim and Achronim, including also the Talmud of the Gro, Pa'at HaShulchan, who says, the Rambam does not say, he says an obligation, we see from the Mishnah. The Mishnah proves it's an obligation. So how does it get around that? He says, at all times it's at least a mitzvah d'Rabbanan. It's certainly an obligation, called the Rambam as well. You might call it a mitzvah d'Rabbanan, because you can't deny the mitzvah of the Ron after the Rambam says explicitly, you've always got to live in Eretz Yisrael unless you've got certain excuses. So this is the usual interpretation of the Rambam. So in other words, either Rambam holds the Rabbanon, but an obligation, or he will hold, and also you can say the same about the Paskim, the Rosh, the Rif also, the Rosh, the Rif, the Raivad, and the Shulchan Aruch, who mention all as a halacha. They don't, in their brief statements, say if it's the right of the Rabbanon. So they might follow the Rambam, and leave it open. Then everyone knows that Ramban says it's Deraisa, the Rambam says the Rabbanon, and Rabbi Chaim Cohen says doesn't apply to, or doesn't apply today because of Sakona. Megillas Esther says doesn't apply, but Megillas Esther doesn't make sense. What do you mean? Because it doesn't apply in the Golos is not one of the 630 mitzvahs. The Rambam has plenty of mitzvot that only apply in the time of the Beis HaMikdash. It will only apply in future when the Mashiach comes. So therefore, we are very surprised, extremely surprised, as one of the greatest poskim of recent times, with whom I also had close connections. I used to ask him shilas when I was in America. But when I saw one of his teshuvas, and in fact I started preparing questions to ask him, so he already departed. And that's from Moshe Feinstein. And today, so many big poskim, there's his Talmidim, and all his teshuvas are different. Like I've had different teachers from Sakalocha, but one of my teachers for 12 years was the Baal Minchas Yitzchok, who's already regarded one of the biggest poskim in the world, was. So I had the zchus to be B'Shamashim for 12 years, and it was teshuvas. The Baal Minchas Yitzchok, Yitzchok Yankavais, he became afterwards the head of the Eda Charidis. And his method of teshuvas, in fact, when I started, he asked me to write teshuvas. I was more used to Moshe Feinstein's method. Moshe Feinstein is one of the greatest poskim of today because he goes right to the roots. Even more than the teshuvas of Rav Elyashiv, who also likes to do that. But still, Moshe Feinstein, any question, he goes to the Gemara and discusses the pshat in the Gemara and works out the Rishonim, and that doesn't always even quote the Achronim. That means the poskim will come after the Beis Yosef. He gives this Plak Halacha. But it's rare I find a tshuva from him, or unless he has these tshuvas ketzoret and people ask all details of Chus Shabbos, so he just said yes or no. But such an important question, and he doesn't quote, it gives such a brief answer. In fact, it's given like if somebody asked him a few questions together concerning dinim of ishus. So he says, I'll quote in full, your question that you asked me, is it a mitzvah today to live in Eretz Yisrael like the Ramban, or like Rechaim, so Rechaim is the Tzisis Ksuvas, who says not a mitzvah today, and obviously he means Rechaim, who says because it's difficult to fulfill the mitzvahs of Tluis Boretz. So he says, we all know that Ramban says it's an obligation. We all know Chaim Kohen says it doesn't. But I explained to you what the Shloach Kodesh says. Well, it doesn't make sense to many. The Talmud Torah, and you find the big Achronim, what it says from Hagos Mordechai. You see, there was a mistake in the text of the Torah. So these are the two sources, as it were. So Rav Aposkim hold it's a mitzvah today. Aval Poshot, it's obvious. She'ein ze bezman ze mitzvah chiyuvis shalaguf. It's obvious. It's not a mitzvah on the person. Dim Kain, if so, would be forbidden to live in Chutz La'aretz because it transgresses the prohibition. Just like a person who wears a four-cornered garment without tzitzis, then it's forbidden to put on the tzitzis. It's forbidden to wear the garment without tzitzis. Yeah? A person who would today wear a four-cornered garment and not wear one of the corners round like I do, yeah? But he has a proper four-cornered and doesn't put tzitzis on, he transgresses a prohibition. He transgresses a lava bomichlalaseh. Since the Torah says you're obligated to put four tzitzis on the four corners of your garment, if you just put on a four corner without it, you're making a transgression. You're transgressing an aseh. It's bittul aseh. Yeah? So, in other words, but it's easy to get out of it, just make one of the corners round like we do. But still, he says, the mitzvah of tzitzis, he says the same applies to Eretz Yisrael. It should also be in Issa. Otherwise, nobody should be allowed to live in Chutz La'aretz, he's saying. And the only thing that's mentioned is Alador be'eretz Yisrael, she'ose lot says. A person lives in Eretz Yisrael is not allowed to leave. Leave Eretz Yisrael, lishkon, to settle in Chutz La'aretz. That's the words of the Rambam. And you must say, you can't say it's a lav. It's not a prohibition. Of course not. If you say it's a prohibition, the Rambam should have said, it's forbidden to live in Chutz La'aretz. Elaim ken, unless there's a famine which applies in Eretz Yisrael, so you've got to get out. And mitzad asay ein chiyuvet. There's no positive obligation. Only if he lives there, then it's got a mitzvah to stay there. And then he said, Machidushim, which I haven't seen, in Tivra B'chaim, because so he says, since it's not an absolute obligation, therefore we've got to consider the chashash of Rabbi Chaim in Tzisis. Can a person really be careful with the mitzvahs at Louis Ba'oretz? So, he doesn't mention the Shloah Kodesh, okay, but he should at least mention Hagos Mordechai. Just mention Hagos Mordechai, you find the back of the Gemara. Not so different. Mordechai is brought the back of the Rif in every Shas Gemara. So, I don't know what's going on here. And he doesn't quote the Ramban properly. The Ramban uses the phrase that's choiva al kol yochid, to live in Eretz Yisrael, bizman hazeh. Doesn't quote it. It's just based on the Rambam. And why the Rambam doesn't mention the mitzvah, so there's so many other terutzim given. There's no shakla v'tarya. So, where'd he get it from? It's a pella. So, and really I've got more questions. I made a list of the questions I've got on the Moshe Feinstein, which I discussed them with Reb Mordechai Tendler, who's the one who, in the last years, he was the one who wrote out most of his teshuvas. So, kasha number 1. The Ramban and the Charedim, and even the Raavad, it's mashma, it's an obligation for all time, so everybody. Then, that second question, that we see the Shloah Kodesh. What's it say? It says the statement made in the Gemara, which is quoted by the Rambam, the person should always live in Eretz Yisrael, even the Esheruba Akum. And he says it applies even b'chobona. This applies even in the Churban Abayis. Other words, to support the Ramban. Applies today as well. There's an obligation. And then the Rambam, first of all, the Rambam could be, like many, I found in Rashbash already mentions it by the side, and Rav Kook also held that view, that the reason, and others, Rav Kook doesn't on his own basis, on what's hinted at in many tshuvas, in Trumas Hadesh and Rashbats, the very important Achronim hint at the fact that the Rambam, he holds it's a mitzvah klolis. That's why he doesn't mention a separate mitzvah. And the other pshat, which is even, that surely he should have quoted, Pastor Shulchan says, it's definitely a chiyuv d'Rabbanon to live in Eretz Yisrael today, even according to the Rambam. The Rambam really doesn't mention it as one of the Tariach mitzvahs, which are mitzvahs of the Torah. But a chiyuv d'Rabbanon there is. And then I'd like to ask, is there any Jew who's a bit learned who doesn't put on tzitzis? It's like a minhag of Kol Am Yisrael, which has even reached the level of being mentioned in the Shulchan Aruch number of places, that a person should go around with and wear tzitzis. And already he's got no obligation with the Torah, but he's got an obligation with Rabbanon to put on tzitzis. And the Gemara says the Malach came to see Rav Katina, who didn't wear four-cornered garments, so he didn't need to put on tzitzis. So he says. So he was told by the Malach, if there's any anger against your behavior, min hashomayim, then you will lose the protection of the tzitzis, beitna derischa, because you didn't fulfill it. So therefore, so what's the heter? What's the heter for people not to come to Eretz Yisrael? The only heter which exists, the heter mentioned Chazal. If you look all around, which poskim do you have to support you? And there Moshe Rabbeinu said, no, so you've got to consider that Chaim Cohen, which is probably a mistake, It's difficult to fulfill the mitzvah. So someone who says, I want to fulfill the mitzvah Tluis Boras. I want to keep Shemitah, which you can keep today in Eretz Yisrael. I want to keep, if you're not a farmer, you hardly have a problem. Oh, you've got to learn a lot of halachas, as we'll have to all learn here as well. And you've got such good hechsherim on all sides in Eretz Yisrael. So much Torah in Eretz Yisrael. What excuse is there for anyone not to fulfill the mitzvah, the Raisa, the Rabbanon, to live in Eretz Yisrael? It's a big kasha on this teshuvah. And I told him if they can find anything, I must find the opportunity to speak to the sons. I haven't managed to speak to them about it yet. But so far, it's a mystery. What I have heard, I asked the Lubavitcher Rebbe. I've had a longer time with him. And I do, why does he come to Eretz Yisrael? He said to me, because he thinks that's what he said, I also shouldn't come to Eretz Yisrael. Same reason, on the lower level. Because we've got to make sure that we don't ignore our responsibility for the Jews who are assimilating Chutz La'aretz. And if somebody's working in that direction, as he was all the time, with great success, we can raise Yad Shmaya, it's a mistake to come to Eretz Yisrael. And he had a hidden reason as well, which I understood from the whole conversation.
What's hidden reason?
Hidden reason is because he knew what he was up against with the Mishiachistic movement.
Which Mishiachistic movement?
In his time also, when I came to him, I came with a group of Lubavitch. Yeah. So my first question to him, they said the Rebbe must be the Mashiach. Even then, it's going back 50 years. In the year 63, I was there. So the Rebbe, in fact, he asked me. I had two periods with him to talk with him. So one of my first questions was, is it true? You're saying the Mashiach? I said no. But what does he do? He believed very strongly in getting people to say peace or Yeshua. As I said, the Ikka of the Rambam is b'chol yom b'chakel Yeshua. It's a mitzvah. You've got to remember every day to pray to daven to Hashem. Please let Mashiach come. Like you see in many proofs from Chazal, Mashiach come any day, and that's what it tells people. But that he's the Mashiach, he made a declaration in one of his Mesibas. Anyone who says the Mashiach should not come to his Beis HaMedrash. He's very opposed to it. When did it become strong? When it became strong, the Mashiach movement, only when he became, started having signs of the stroke. Yeah, they couldn't oppose it so much anymore. And it's not only from me, but let's say a special shliach been appointed to give guidance with regard to the politics of Eretz Yisrael is Rabbi Yosef Gutnik, whom you also met, yeah? Rabbi Yosef Gutnik. Every time he's here and made the Kiddush, he says to me, please tell everybody what the Rebbe said to you. Because he's anti-Mashiachist, because he was very much against it. So, but one of the reasons was he was afraid he'd come to Eretz Yisrael. He wanted everybody to go and learn Hilchos Melachim, which deals with the Mashiach of the Rambam. And I've even got the commentary that he gave on the Rambam when I had a few Talmidim who were Mashiachistim, came to the yeshiva.
Really?
Yeah, so I learned with them the Lubavitcher Rebbe's commentary on the laws.
You should have it printed on the wall.
And then, yeah, that's why I say what I said to the Hesped for Rav Shach. And they said when Rav Shach goes into Olam Haba, the Vilna Gaon will come towards him and thank him for his battle against the Mashiachistim. I said more. I said, I know the Lubavitcher Rebbe will come and thank you. Yeah, because he was deceived. People deceived Rav Shach. In fact, some people told me, please, they want to take to. I know one of the people who deceived him.
Zola Skanim, they did it with the Gra as well. They
the Gra, that's something similar. Yeah, right.
They did a sichsur. They told the.
So that was the hidden reason. He said, if we come to Eretz Yisrael, it says also the Mashiach will become revealed in Eretz Yisrael. Yeah. So anyway, so this is, and let's take out an important lesson from here. Baruch Hashem, we fulfill the mitzvah every minute. And the Charedim says part of the mitzvah of living in Eretz Yisrael, it's not just separate, it's part of the same mitzvah, is to rejoice in it, to love it, to the love of Eretz Yisrael. And this goes very much together what is said about the mitzvah of Tzisis. Tzitzis represents, the Ramban says, to love Hashem. In Eretz Yisrael we have to learn to love Hashem. And all the difficulties we have, we should love Hashem, that He gives us the opportunity to be in Eretz Yisrael. And this Eretz Yisrael, we see also, there's Hashgocha Protis, on every step we take in Eretz Yisrael. Let's try to fulfill it. Of course, try to fulfill all the mitzvahs HaTluis B'Oretz. And we should know every mitzvah we do in Eretz Yisrael is double what we can do in Chutz L'Oretz. So, for example, I see, there's a certain person that tried to persuade him last night you should stay here. Because there's Hashgocha Protis here as well. There's Hashgocha Protis. I don't know if you managed to go there already, the Rabbanut?
I went and
They were positive?
told me to give them a phone call.
To what?
They told me to give them a phone call, but I met the rabbi.
Yeah, very good. Very good. You should tell everybody. You should do the same. Should go. Why? Because the Zchus of Eretz Yisrael, and although I know we've had great difficulties.
If they go with Rav Schwartz, they pass them like that, I think. Because they know him, like he's part of them.
Maybe they'll try that. Yeah. At the moment, even if you go by yourselves, it'll go easy. I think it seems to be. So Ezra has shown us the way. Yeah.
Okay, Ezra can testify about the Hashgacha Pratis of Eretz Yisrael in every step he has.
That's right.
That's why he's called Ezra.
That's right. Yeah. No one.
Yeah,